There's this really cool YouTube channel I watch often called the Virtual Gaming Library, or VGL for short. Their goal is to catalog footage of every game released on a console. Simple 10-second clips, the game's box art, when and where it was released, pretty much just all the basic info you need to know, and then bam, slap it into an 11-hour YouTube video. It's genius. I usually put these videos on in bed at night when I'm trying to sleep, and it always amazes me how many games you'll come across that you've just never heard of. Like, yeah, sure, 30% of the games released in Japan are visual novels or pachinko games, but there is some pretty interesting looking games in here beneath the piles of weeb trash. Nowhere was this more prevalent than in the list of PS1 games. The console has a ludicrous amount of games released, and I genuinely think there is an almost bottomless pit of weird and forgotten games released on the system. To put it into perspective, the big three consoles at the time, the N64, the Saturn and the PlayStation, how many games do you think were released on these consoles across all regions? There's two things to take from this. One is that the N64 has a surprisingly small number of games, and two is that the PlayStation 1 has an absolutely ludicrous amount of games. One of the main things I wanted to accomplish with this YouTube channel is to highlight video games that might not get as big a spotlight elsewhere. There's plenty of channels dedicated to talking about great games, the classics, the shit everybody wants to play, but there's also plenty of channels dedicated to the worst games, the trash, the laughingstocks of the system. What about the games in between? There's thousands of games on this console. Surely there's tons that have been forgotten and faded into obscurity. There's a good chance most of them are pretty bad, but still, what if they're not? What if we're sleeping on a hidden gem? A game with a banger soundtrack, amazing writing, weird art direction? I gotta find out. So I came up with a plan to do so. I sat down and I watched 10 seconds of gameplay from every single PS1 game in alphabetical order from every region. And anytime I saw a game that looked interesting and was relatively unknown, I put it on a list. It doesn't matter what the games are about, what the genre is, if those 10 seconds piqued my interest and I didn't know much else about it, it's going on the list.
You know what's gonna happen? Oh, you know what's happening to you right now? Huh? You know what's gonna happen? No. Words? You just made the list!
Now the bad news is that VGL's catalogue of PS1 games currently only goes from A to J, so I don't have a full list completed yet, but even with just 10 letters of the alphabet, we currently have over 180 games listed, and better yet, that's just the games released in the West. The Japanese exclusive list has an additional 230 games included, and this is only from the letters A to J. By the time it's complete, it's gonna be massive. I want to give these lesser known games a chance to shine. Some might actually be good, some might be bad. Most will probably be bad, to be honest, but at the very least, there's a chance both you and I will learn something new. So yeah, let's play some games. Now you're probably wondering how we decide which games to play. Well, first off, I'm going to be splitting the Western and Japanese games into their own separate video series. The Japanese exclusive games are so wild that they honestly deserve their own space to kind of do their thing, so that will be a video for a later date. Right now on the main series, we're just going to be looking at games released throughout Europe and North America. Now, we could just play the games in alphabetical order, but nobody wants that. I don't want that. Do you want that? Nobody wants that. So to make things fun, we're going to add a bit of mystery to the game selection. I devised an incredibly effective system of selecting which games to play. It's foolproof and chosen for maximum entertainment value. First, we take every single game in alphabetical order and add it to a list randomizer. Once the order has been randomized, we then take the top 100 games and add them into a giant spinning wheel. We will then spin the wheel 3 times, and whatever 3 games the wheel lands on, that's what we're going to play in today's episode. Now believe me, if I had things my way, I would have my own giant wheel set up in person so I could live out my Marty Whelan winning streak fantasy, but in the meantime this setup will have to do. So let's not waste any more time. What's going to be the first of our 3 games?
Something is wrong, Fritz.
Braindead 13 is one of the earliest games to release on the PlayStation, having come out in 1995. Do you remember those interactive animated games from the 80s like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace? Well, this game is pretty much the same thing, for better and for worse. This game also came out on multiple other platforms, including the PC, Saturn and 3DO. The selling point of these games has always been that you're basically playing a cartoon. Your character runs into different scenarios and you need to quickly react with a timed button press to move. If you press the wrong button or take too long to press it, you'll die. And believe me, this is a game where you will die a lot. The story for this game is pretty fun. You play as Lance, a computer technician who's been called out to an evil, ominous castle for some tech support. After fixing up the problem, you happen to insult the evil disembodied owner of the place, which leads to the castle's inhabitants stopping at nothing to have you killed.
Soon nothing shall stand in my way. I will rule the world.
From there on, you gotta try to escape the castle and kill any of the creatures who get in your way. I really love the animations and backgrounds in this game. You get a great Saturday morning cartoon vibe with the characters and locations, also mixed in with a surprising amount of over-the-top gore as well. It's all very lighthearted and silly gore, but it still makes for some great death animations because of it. The real draw of this game, to be honest, is seeing all of the incredibly vast amounts of ways that you can die. For each screen that you end up on, there's probably at least 3 or 4 different ways that you can die in it, and they're nearly all brilliant. As far as the presentation, the soundtrack, the voice work, everything here is fantastic. There's so much of it that they had to split it across 2 discs as well. It's clearly a very high budget production, and I think they nailed the gory Saturday morning cartoon style that they were looking for. The problem, however, and this rings true for pretty much any game of this style, is that the gameplay is incredibly shallow, obnoxiously difficult, obscenely obtuse at times, and incredibly repetitive. The entire game is more or less a test of your patience and memorization. The controls in this game are very simple. The game's weirdly CDI-esque option screen will show you all 5 commands available to you within the game. Any room you enter, you have a brief second to input a direction or press the action button. If you press the correct button at the right time, then you don't die. If you press the incorrect button or you mistime your button press, you die. Pretty simple, right? Well, it would be, but the game doesn't give you any prompts on which button you need to press, so you can show up in a room, a second will pass, and you're dead. Then when you try the room again, you press the wrong button, and you're dead. Do it again, dead. And again, dead. And again, okay, I got it this time, and dead again. There is a layout to this castle that allows you to move around it, but since you've got pretty much a second to decide which way you want to go, getting your bearings around the place is pretty much impossible your first time around. And some of the more action-orientated rooms require very specific button presses nearly 5 or 6 times in a row with practically no info on what you've got to do. It's just guesswork and memorization. It looks like I knew to dodge the marionette a few times, kick it up and then climb up the rope, but for a few minutes before that, I was just dying over and over again because there's no way for you to know that you can do any of this. And the fact that it's timed too, so if you press the right button in the wrong split second, you're dead anyway. It's so much unnecessary trial and error. I suppose it's a good thing that the game has so many cool death scenes because you're gonna be seeing them about 100 times in your first 30 minutes of playing, but even then, because of that, you're gonna end up watching the same scenes over and over again with how often you need to restart. And even the coolest scenes can wear a bit thin when it's your 10 times seeing them in the space of 5 minutes. I honestly don't really mind quick time events in games, but games like this that are built around them, and especially ones that give you no information whatsoever on what you're meant to be doing, they've just aged so poorly. There's no denying here that this game looks amazing, but even by 1995, this style of game had already worn out its welcome on the scene. The Sega CD, the 3DO, the Philips CDI all banked on games like this, and you can see how they turned out. Once you get over the pretty FMV and you get into the shallow, frustrating gameplay, it's something that only the most dedicated players wouldn't give up on within a few minutes. If you're into these type of games, absolutely give it a try. It's one of the weirder attempts at this genre and there's some genuinely great animation and dialogue here, but for everybody else, just watch somebody play through the game on YouTube instead. It's not that long and it will likely be 1,000 times more enjoyable without you stopping and starting all the time. I can promise you that.
The wheel will provide.
I'll assume you're all aware of Insomniac Games. You might know them as the creators of Spyro the Dragon, Ratchet & Clank, the best Spider-Man game, Sunset Overdrive if you're cool and played that one. Well, Disruptor is the first game the studio ever developed. Released in 1996, here we have a console and PlayStation exclusive sci-fi FPS game, and guess what? It's actually pretty good. Disruptor feels and plays very similarly to a lot of the Doom clones available at the time. We were still a few years off Half-Life, so you can expect to see all of the genre staples here. Individual levels, secret areas, lots of switches and doors to unlock. But Insomniac have put in a lot of effort into making the game stand out from the other early FPS games released on the platform. For one, this game's levels are built with 3D texture maps, and for 1996, this probably looks stunning compared to a lot of the games on the market, let alone FPS games. Sure, the weapons, items, and enemies are still using 2D sprites, but they still look really nice mixed in with the 3D environments in the levels Insomniac has crafted here. While the levels still flow similarly to most Doom clones of the era, the map design does try to take advantage of the engine that they built for the game. Each of the levels look visually different than the last, with distinct colour changes, new additions to the level geometry, indoor and outdoor levels, although the outdoor levels have some heavy draw distance limitations that could make the original Turok jealous. As for the game's combat, the gunplay is basic but effective. Of course, you've got your pistol, machine gun, shotgun as expected, but Insomniac's love of weird weapons didn't just start in Ratchet & Clank. Disruptor features a bunch of plasma weapons, homing rocket launchers, plasma grenade minigun things, this one-use flamethrower jet that wrecks everything. If I'm being honest, the weapons could feel and sound a little punchier at times. This game's shotgun in particular is pretty low down in the pantheon of video game shotguns, but it does get the job done. Interestingly, this game isn't just focused on guns alone. If anything, the game barely gives you ammo for any of these things. In the game's later levels, you'll find yourself struggling for ammo, even if you're hitting up some of the secret areas. This is part of the game's design though, because on top of your standard weapons, your main character also gets a bunch of psionic abilities as well, a new one being added after select missions. The psionic abilities give you a lot more options for combat, damaging shockwaves, shields, heals, steerable AoE balls. The abilities will be just as important as your guns for getting through the game. There's also an ability called Drain that lets you regain some extra energy off downed enemies, so a big part of the game is swapping between your weapons and psionic attacks while trying to manage your limited resources on each. It's a really interesting gameplay mechanic, and it does make the gameplay a lot more intense, especially since the game can be pretty brutal even on the default difficulty. There's a surprisingly wide variety of enemies in this game as well, ranging from melee, projectile hit scanners, big rocket boys, cybermechs, bigger cybermechs. There's a lot here, and they'll make sure to make your life hell. Honestly, the levels, the gameplay, the enemies, everything here is great for a PS1 FPS game. We even get a full CD quality soundtrack, and while none of the tracks struck me as particularly memorable, they all fit the levels really well. Now you might be wondering about the controls, but since this game doesn't use the Y-axis similarly to Doom, movement and aiming is really easy using the D-pad and shoulder buttons for strafing. Changing weapons and powers can be cumbersome in the middle of a fight, but for a PS1 FPS this plays about as well as it possibly could. Now outside of the gameplay, I still need to talk about my single favourite thing in this game.
If you don't have the brain power to outmaneuver a few droids with attitude, I'd never forgive myself for sending you on a real mission. Just remember, think fast, shoot fast, and kick ass.
It is full of live action full motion video cutscenes. I'm talking cheesy B-movie, sci-fi, Starship Troopers-esque military storyline that's delivered surprisingly well by the actors they hired for the job. There's one of these before every single level, and they just get better and better as the game goes on. Some of the delivery is just perfection.
They want to see if you can nail the bad guys without blowing away any of the hostages.
Hostages?
In the words of your brother, being a stormer, it's more than just kicking ass. Show us you got what it takes, and then maybe, just maybe, we'll send you out on a real mission.
And before every single level, the guy always turns to the camera dramatically and we get this scene. Every single level, I never get sick of it. Disruptor is a pretty tough game, but I genuinely had a lot of fun in my time playing it. For Insomniac's first full game as a developer, Disruptor is a really entertaining and polished effort, especially for a console exclusive FPS. in 1996. If you like older boomer shooter style FPS games and you think you can tolerate the PS1 control scheme, this game comes highly recommended from me. If not for the gameplay, at least try it for the full motion video scenes. It's worth the price of admission alone.
The wheel will provide.
So I added this next game to the list because it looked like a Micro Machines clone, and I, like most sane people, love Micro Machines, so I was looking forward to trying it out. When I booted up the game, to my surprise, I found that that's actually developed by the same people who made Micro Machines 2, Turbo Tournament Military, Supersonic Software, so this is legit a real Micro Machines game in everything but name. And what a name it is! Daredevil Derby 3D was released exclusively on the PlayStation in 1996. In Europe, this game is called Supersonic Racers, which not only references the developers, but is just a much better name in general. But if a game has a name as bad as Daredevil Derby 3D, then that's the one I want to play. This game packs a surprisingly large amount of content. We've got 6 different modes available, from championships, head-to-heads, time trials, Grand Prix. There's plenty here to do, and the game features over 30 different tracks to race on, with each of the game's 10 different locations housing 3 unique tracks. While a lot of the racing will take place on the road, in true Micro Machines style, this game features a variety of different vehicles that change based on where it is that you're racing. If you're on the snow, well, they change to snowmobiles. If you're underwater, you're in a submarine. If you're in the sky, well, now you're racing blimps. In space, you're in a rocket now, and you can barely control yourself. It's great. What's cool is that each of the vehicles control quite differently from one another. It gives the game a pretty steep learning curve, since just as you're learning to get used to one vehicle, you're hopping immediately into a whole new type of vehicle in between races, but it does help to keep the gameplay fresh. The levels themselves are fun for the most part. The tracks are pretty short, with 3 laps of one track taking anywhere from a minute to 2 minutes to complete on average. You can expect lots of hazards and drops. Most of the levels as well have a ton of sneaky shortcuts. This game also features a lot of the fun level gimmicks from Micro Machines, like this whale that spits you ahead of the track, or these platforms that you gotta drive onto that transport you further throughout the track. I always love these. Visually, the large amount of level variety is nice. All the tracks are very bright and colourful, if a bit basic. Each world has its own unique look and feel, it's just that none of them are really that memorable. The graphics overall look very much like that of an early PS1 game. They do the job, but they are pretty much just passable for the most part. The game's roster of characters, on the other hand, I think I hate each and every one of these designs. Thankfully, you're not going to really see them much outside of this screen, but it's slim pickings. Each character has their own vehicle design, which is nice, and they can range from pretty cool to just like a orange blob, I guess. The music here is surprisingly quite good as well. It can range from catchy to atmospheric, and it even has top tier underwater music as well. Not bad at all. Once you get to grips with the control in Daredevil Derby 3D, there's a lot to like here. It really is just bare bones Micro Machines, and if that's your thing, you'll probably like this a lot. Although the game does have a few issues that are worth noting. The AI in this game can be pretty brutal at times. A lot of the races require you to use shortcuts and drive perfectly to win, and the game has some wild bouncy physics when colliding with your opponents, and they really love to crash into you too, so sometimes races can be a complete write-off thanks to the AI just deciding that it hates you out of nowhere. The camera angles can also be a little too close up in some areas, so some of these tracks will require a bit of memorization rather than quick reflexes to beat, but that's kind of been the case in previous Micro Machines games too, so I guess that's to be expected. Another big thing is that this game only supports 2 players, and while I'm sure this game is a blast with 2 players, Micro Machines V3, which is also on the PlayStation, supports 8 players simultaneously. In fact, Daredevil Derby 3D's biggest problem is that there's pretty much no reason to play it over Micro Machines V3, which does every single thing that this game does, but much better. More elaborate tracks, more vehicles, more modes, more players, weapons have been added. Codemasters just came in and made the definitive PS1 Micro Machines game a year after this, making Daredevil Derby 3D pretty much obsolete. It's a shame because there's still a lot to like here. It's pretty basic, but at its core it's a fun racing game on the PS1. It's colourful, the music is good, the characters, okay, forget about them. But if you're into Micro Machines games and you're looking for more of the same, you really can't go wrong with this one. But if it's your first time trying out any of these top-down racers, just go for Micro Machines V3 instead. It does everything this game does, but just way better. Except for the underwater music. Daredevil Derby is still the king in that regard. So this brings us to the end of Volume 1, and I think the 3 games we looked at today give us a good idea of the variety in the PS1's library, and we're only really just scratching the surface here. At the end of each episode, I think it's only right to slot each game into one of 3 categories. Is the game a must play? Is it something worth trying if you like the look of it? Or is the game trash and not worth your time? Volume 1 sees each category getting its first entry, with Braindead 13 making its way into Trash tier, Daredevil Derby 3D making it into Try tier, and Disruptor making it into Must Play tier. I think all of these games each offer something interesting to the PlayStation library, but Disruptor is the clear standout game of the bunch and the only one I'd suggest to people as a must play on the system. So let me know, have you tried any of these games yourself? Drop me a comment to let me know your opinions on them if you have. We've got plenty more games to get through, but if there's any obscure games on the PS1 that you think I should check out, drop it in the comments too, and if I don't already have it on the list, I'll make sure to get it added. Until then, thank you very much for joining me today for Volume 1. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, it's always really appreciated. And there's also plenty more PS1 content on the channel if you want to watch more in the meantime. But until then, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time for Volume 2. And hopefully more FMV cutscenes, if we're lucky.